Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Sargent number 64-8205-LNL with an FW option in a right-hand reverse and a 630 finish. This is a Mortise Lock from Sargent, and this video is going to serve as a overview of the unit in terms of a visual tour of the item, a review of the product catalog, the installation instructions, the cut sheet, the template, and the parts manual. So let's start with a visual review of this lock set. The name Sargent has been synonymous with manufacturing lock sets since the 19th century, or at least hardware. And there are several archival catalogs down below this video that will, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page, I should say, that will allow you to review not only the current catalog, but these archival catalogs that are listed there. And it's nice to be able to look back at what was manufactured years ago, not only for fun, but for research purposes as well. I like to be able to refer back to exactly what it is that something looked like, or how something was manufactured so many years, or in fact decades ago. Okay, let's continue to take a look here. We have the parts taken out, and of course here's the business end. Now the 8205 is of course one of countless functions from Sargent. An 8205 is going to be a function that's going to be called an office or an entry. And we'll go over the exact operational description of this unit. An office or entry, though, however, features a thumb turn on one side, it features a cylinder on the other side. You can lock, leave the door, available to be unlocked when you exit. Mortise case. Reversing instructions are actually on the body itself, and we'll go over that later. Typical 8-inch format, 8-inch by 1.25 format, about 4.5 inch deep. That's the lock body itself, a nylon insert. That's going to assist with operation and the decimal level as well. That insert will help keep the operation of the lock silent. Moving along with the lock, let's just look at the armor front. That piece of architectural metal there, in this case it's stainless, that's called an armor front. And that is the finish or scalp plate. On it you can see that it has the UL stamp, which attests to the fact that this product has been tested, therefore listed, and is labeled. It has evidence of its compliance with this label that's there that will tell a fire door assembly inspector or just the authority having jurisdiction that the unit is compliant. This lock was ordered with the LNL trim. That's what that looks like. It's a nice, heavy, solid trim, there's no doubt. It's a very proud lever. It's not small by any means. Quite comfortable in the hand completely. The way that Sargent does that is it's an LNL, and the LN is the rose. That is their, in my experience, the most common rose that I see happen on their locks. It is 2-inch in diameter, 5/16 thick, 2-inch in diameter, 5/16. Then, of course, we have the L in the part number as well. That's the L lever, and that is the LNL, in my experience, is the most common confluence of rose and trim design. Okay, they've got this at 5-inch overall width, that is indeed the case. 5-inch overall width. It is going to have, it'll return back to, let's take a look. I think it's 5/16. And as we're looking at that 5/16, it's a bit difficult, of course, to actually measure, but the face of the door to the back side of the trim is what they're showing as 5/16. Okay, it has a total projection of 2 3/8. Yeah, closer to about 2.5. Unless they're measuring it. Yeah, about closer to 2.5. Very handsome lever. This is in 630 finish, stainless steel. So we have our exterior trim, we have our interior lever with its interior mounting plate. Of course, the rose that will go along with it. We have our cylinder. This client, and we're going to dissect the part number 2. This client ordered an interchangeable core. That's where the 64 is going to come into the part number. We've got a change key for it. There are 2 change keys for this lock. Then the control key that will allow us to remove the unit. Sargent's a bit, I don't know that they're unique, but they put their control bar on the opposite side of what you might be accustomed to seeing, especially in small format. I don't know if Medico, their sister company, puts it on that side as well. I just don't remember. Nice quality brass cylinder. Ought to be 1.25 inches. Underside of the head to the back of the cam, sure, 1.25 inches. This is in, let's see what keyway this is. The HF is a, I don't know why HF was selected for this job. The keyway was not specified, so would not be a problem that it was supplied. When you're ordering a lock, you would certainly want to supply a keyway so that there was, so that it was clearly translated what you expected to have. The typical keyway is LA, which is part of a large multiplex system of 9 different keyways. The HF is going to be similar in that multiplex structure. They indicate that it's part of a master key system, so the H section or the H family is likely reserved for such projects. You know, I don't know why it was selected. It doesn't really matter. So we've got our cylinder. We have our cylinder collar. Okay. This is going to include a spring so that that cylinder can be installed where you like it. We're going to have our thumb turn. Let's take a look at the thumb turn. Being an office function, it will certainly have a thumb turn on the inside. We're going to get into all the options and variations. What I like about the Sargent system is that they have one hole to secure it to the door, and the point is you've got one less screw head that you see when you're operating the thumb turn. Not really sure if that is. I highly doubt that there's any problem with there being only one mounting point. I've not ever heard of that. The rest of the packaging will include the screws that will be necessary to mount the lock body, to mount the armor front, to mount the strike to the frame, wood or steel applications. Then lastly, we're going to get a template. We're going to get our installation instructions, and we're going to go over all of those documents as we move forward with this video. Let's proceed through the product catalog that's listed below. The this catalog is going to apply to the 78 and the 8200 series Mortise locks. 7800 is going to be appropriate for push and pull trims, anti-vandal options as well. The 7800 can also do knob and escutcheon trims like the 8200. The primary difference between the two is that the 7800 series lock is for knob trim and the 8200 series is for lever trim. They treat the lock bodies different. The bottom line is if you have a knob trim versus a lever trim, this lever alone, just this assembly, weighs 1.18 pound, almost 1.2 pound. It's going to take a lot more spring power to return that horizontal than it would a knob. Okay, so they literally make different lock bodies based on that. I can't help but think there might be a more elegant way to resolve that by maybe adding a spring when you're doing levers, but you know, I'm not an engineer. But the bottom line is that's the difference between the two. You can use a knob trim on an 8200, but you're probably going to find that that spring tension is pretty massive to rotate that knob. And if you used a lever on the 7800 series, it is certainly not going to return the lever back up to where it needs to be. And then the problem with that is you won't be able to then relock the door because the latch will be partially retracted still, is the problem that we see with that. And when clients call and say, hey, my lock won't relock and my lever doesn't return back up vertical, well, there's fatigue with the spring. And replacing the spring is the way by which to mitigate that type of trouble with that problem. To page 3 of the product catalog, we see that we have certification compliance, ANSI BHMA rated for grade 1 according to ANSI A156.13. 13 is the series of the A156 is the series. .13 is the document that lays out what grade 1 is. It's grade 1, which is 1 million cycles of successful operation. Who knows how many cycles it would actually pass. Like other manufacturers, they generally just pull the plug after several million and stop there. Security grade 1, also with all standard trims. ADA compliant, A117 accessibility code. It's compliant with that. It is UL and ULC listed for US and Canadian safety standards for A-labeled doors up to 4 foot by 10 foot, single leafs, and 8.0 by 10.0 double door openings, 3 hour. And we'll have the stamped letter F and UL symbol on the armor front indicating the listing as we showed earlier. Positive pressure rated as well. There are 2 ways that doors are either classified as neutral pressure or positive pressure, and it is positive pressure compliant. California states all levers must return to within half of an inch of the door face. This does. We demonstrated that earlier at 5/16. Tornado and hurricane codes are on page 4, and you are going to find that you will have success when wanting to apply Sargent locks in those jurisdictions, such as here in Collier County, Florida, that require hardware to be listed with a Florida listing, building code listing number. This one is FL2998. You can literally go to the state of Florida has a website or a section of a website that you can pull up the certifications, the listings for their hardware, and that's crucial. Here in Collier County, the permitting process I have been involved in indirectly through the contractor has certainly required documentation stating the Florida building code listing compatibility. Okay. Also windstorm rated, that's there, and that UL certification listing is there. You don't think much about hurricanes when you're in Illinois, but it's a different ballgame when you are in a jurisdiction that faces that on an annual basis. There's then the 8200 and 7800 series lock dimensions. They're showing the lock body. That's handy to be able to review because it will immediately give you an idea as to what sort of size you're going to need in the door to make this, to accommodate this type of lock preparation. Gives you waypoints of where the important parts are, such as the center line of the lock and the relationship of the center line of everything else, the latch bolt, the deadbolt, the guard bolt, or the deadlocking tab, dead latch tab that they show, the location of the screw holes. That's all important because there are times when you really just need to know where is all of this stuff located. And obviously when you're doing a new lock, you're going to get a strike plate, and it's going to be prepped for your application in particular. But that document will also serve to show you how deep the mortise body is. You'll have an understanding of what your mortise preparation needs to be in the door. You can also then better understand if you will have some sort of a conflict with with namely a minimum style requirement to maintain the warranty on a door, or to maintain the integrity of a listing based on the size of the cutout in the door and what minimum distance there needs to be from a prep to a cutout for a hole. Explanation of the 82 and 7800 series lock bodies are there, and it does indicate 82 is lever by rose or escutcheon, 78 is knob by rose or escutcheon, available in all of the different finishes as well. Lock bodies can only be used with the specified trim. That is note number 1. I don't see note number 1. I had said earlier that you could use a lever on a knob trim, and I don't actually know that you could force, they might actually manufacture the spindles and the hubs differently for knobs and levers, but you wouldn't use it because it would not work correctly at all. When they state lock bodies can only be used with the specified trim, it might just because, well, you can bolt it together, but it still won't work. Through bolt locations are different from standard trim. Special door required is note number 2. That applies to that R8200. Note number 3 applies to our 8200. Note cylinder and trim not included. Outside front, strike and screw pack are included. So, like all things in architectural hardware, you have to specify a full part number, such as the title of this video, where it's any prefix, then your lock and your function, and any suffixes need to be included there. That all does need to be called out. Now, it's understood when you order a lock that you want a cylinder if it's a keyed function, but as we'll get to in the back of this catalog, there's going to be a how to order matrix or table by which you determine your full part number. So that's how you go about doing that. Getting to page 5 of the product catalog, the patented Sargent Mortise Lock, designed and constructed with high-quality components to provide maximum security, performance, and durability. These locks represent over a century of innovation and experience in manufacturing hardware and are the industry's benchmark for mortise locks: strong, durable, flexible, and innovative, and secure. That's indeed correct, and Sargent was among in New England, Connecticut area, in particular, in the 19th century, there was a literal explosion of manufacturers of locks and hardware, of which Sargent was among them. And their history does literally go back. When they say over a century, yes, that's very true. You can easily search the history of the Sargent Company and find their long lineage. For doors 1 3/4 thick as a standard, obviously they can manufacture these locks for other door thicknesses. They will only do a 2 3/4 inch back set. Now that's the dimension from the edge of the door to the center, to the vertical center line of your cylinder, of your thumb turn, of your hub and your trim. Okay, so they only do 2 3/4. You can't have 2.5 or 2 inch or anything larger. Now there are companies that manufacture odd back sets for mortise locks. Sargent's not one of them. Outside front plate, brass, bronze, or stainless. They're talking specifically about the armor front. Outside front plate. This is called an armor front. I've seen the term armor front in catalogs that go back 100 years or so, and I noticed that the mortise locks and if you've ever seen a really old mortise lock, has a very thick, solid feature to it. This part, it's like 3/16 thick, and is the end plate, and is typically black. In that same catalog, they'll show one that's designed like this, with an armor front on top of it. And where the term armor front comes from, I don't know, but I could take a guess that armor front might mean that you can work towards concealing the screw holes for the lock, concealing the access to the inner operation by only piercing holes through it that are necessary, by concealing the holes for the set screws that hold the cylinder or mortise thumb turns, things of that nature. It could be the armor front was a more durable base material to protect the edge of the door from lloyding, from trying to tamper with it as well. So making it a two-piece design obviously makes life easy in terms of finishes, but there's more to it. Having an armor front, especially in increasing the appearance, the pleasant appearance of the lock, but concealing access to those parts that you don't want to have access to otherwise. The factory goes on to say that it has an adjustable front plate, a reference to the fact that that front plate moves a little bit, and that is to account for the fact that you could be dealing with a door that is square-edged or beveled. And we'll talk about why the determination of backset is important based on that, but suffice it to say that that moves for a reason, and that's to account for the bevel on your door. Okay, that's why that moves that way. There you go. Let's continue on. Tell us that the hubs for the knobs or levers for the 7800 are sintered iron copper infiltrated, and the 8200 is cold forged steel. I would imagine that one is certainly softer than the other. The amount of force you can put on a lever will certainly be less than what you can generate with a knob, and that would probably explain the difference between the two. The factory goes on to tell us in the product catalog that the auxiliary dead latch is stainless steel and non-handed. It's non-handed because it pivots like that and will work on either hand of door. And the auxiliary dead latch, of course, is what prevents the latch bolt from being lloyded or vandalized or tampered with or otherwise manipulated so that you can just get in with any flat instrument. Okay. The alignment of this with the strike, of course, is such that when you install this, okay, the deadlocking tab is on the flat portion right here. That's what that is. That's how that works. Okay. We'll talk more about this strike plate as we get through the video a little bit further. Now the factory goes on to say to specify the hand on order and that it is easily field reversible. If no hand is specified, right hand will be supplied. And that is indeed the case. They did ship us a right hand. And how we know that is I can insert the trim just, you know, falsely in the lock and I can see that it rotates. I'll just put it in the right way. Okay. Very stiff lever action on that, spring action. That slams back really well. That tells me that that's going to work for years. Now, when I lock the lock, as if I put the thumb turn or the cylinder on the outside, that is now rigid. Okay, the inside, that's unlocked, and when I put the lock in the opposite condition, it's still unlocked. What's nice, rotating it in the opposite direction does not retract the latch. It only works the way it's intended to. Now, to reverse the unit, there's two things you have to do. That red feature on this little doodad here, it's not there. It's not red on this side. Red means locked. That spade profile here is also important. So reversing the lock is either going to require that you switch only the... It's going to require that you switch only the latch bolt or the latch bolt and the locking hub. Okay? So if you if you have a right-hand door and all of a sudden now it's a left-hand reverse, right-hand door goes this way. If you have a left-hand reverse, your flat blade screwdriver is going to go in that spade portion, and they want you to turn that out until you can physically turn that latch bolt around and snap it back in place. Now what we have, we're still locked on the outside. Pardon me, we're still locked on the outside. Now it's for a left-hand reverse. If you go from a right-hand to a right-hand reverse, okay? Right-hand to a right-hand reverse. I don't need to switch the latch bolt. I only now need to switch the outside. Pardon me, I said that wrong. I have said that backwards. A right-hand to a right-hand reverse, you only switch the latch bolt. If you go from a right-hand to a left-hand reverse, you only need to switch the outside locking portion, which what they want you to do in the installation instructions are literally on the case, and we're going to read those at the end. You push, you're going to rotate you push in on this corner here, and you'll be able to I don't want to hurt myself. We'll put it on the desktop first. So I pushed that in far enough when I had the ability to just push it straight down, and I can continue to rotate that around. And now I have it partially rotated. And as I continue through rotating it now, the red is on the opposite side. Okay. So what happens now is I have a left-hand reverse lock where the exterior is locked. If I had to go now, what do we have here? This lock is literally set up as a left-hand reverse. And it is not no other hand. It's a left-hand reverse. It cannot be a right hand anymore because this is now the unlocked side. If you had it as a right hand, this would be the lock side. If you had to change, I'm going to change this back to the way it was. If you had to rotate the lock from what it is from the factory, from a right hand to a left hand, okay, you need to do both. You need to flip the latch bolt over, and you need to rotate the hub over. And the hub this is the hub where the spindle goes into. This portion can either go in and lock so you don't rotate the hub, or it's like this where it can go in and it can still rotate. Is basically how that works. Be happy to take the lock cover off to show you. I just don't think it's necessary. Taking the lock case off of a Mortise lock is maybe you shouldn't do it at all, and I don't know that I would recommend. I do not recommend doing it unless you are an expert in the field. I can't think of a reason to go inside of the lock case for you during a normal installation. I don't believe there is one. The only time you'd go in there is, I guess, when you're going to rebuild something, have to repair something. The lock case isn't working. You're going to pull these screws off. There appear to be 5 of them. And what I like to do is when I get that last screw out, I'll do the 4 outside, then leave the center one, and I'll leave my hand on that case, and I'll slowly tip it up. And what I don't want to hear is ping. I don't want to hear things move. If you get that cover off and nothing's moved, I suggest you take a picture of it immediately. There is a link below this video to the parts diagram, but you don't want to have an epic Rubik's Cube or a game of Jenga or some other worse analogy to have to put a Mortise lock back together with no experience and not having something to look at in order to be able to tell you how to put it back together. So you don't want to be in that position. Strike is brass, bronze, or stainless steel. We're doing 630 in our part number. This piece is literally going to be made of, well, it is not stainless steel. You know, stainless steel picks up magnetic properties when it's machined, but that's awfully magnetic. The only thing I can say is this must be of a type of stainless steel that does have a substantial amount of magnetism. You know, it's stainless steel. If this was pure steel, I don't think I'd be able to rock that off as easily. Passivated is the term when you want to have stainless that's not magnetized or exhibiting any magnetic properties. So they say it's made of stainless. It's got to be made of stainless. Now let's continue on. Moving forward through into the catalog, keys, 2 nickel-silver keys are included. Nickel-silver is a more durable base material for keys than just brass would be. Not as and certainly more durable than aluminum. Not as durable as steel or stainless steel, but aluminum you won't find in a key like this. Aluminum keys were manufactured, you know, a century ago. Yale's feather key, I think is what they called it, may have been made of aluminum. Brass and nickel-silver are the 2 typical ones. Sometimes you'll get a stainless steel key, especially when you're dealing with an all-section key blank. So be mindful when you're cutting stainless steel key blanks that your cutter may not like that as much as something reasonably softer like nickel, silver, or brass. If you're cutting a steel key, you're probably working on a safety deposit box, sort of key that would take a slotting cutter. But this would be, you know, nickel silver doesn't mean that they're silver color. That's just the alloy or the amalgamation. It's nice to have a brass coating over the nickel silver if you are doing any sort of locksmithing or impressioning work. You can file that down to reveal the different color underneath. And that will help you in the process of impressing a key, perhaps. Cylinder, brass. They call this a size 41 standard, except for Freewheeling, which is a size 46. 1 3/4 they say. This is a Freewheeling cylinder. That might be a typo. Yeah, we have an FW. We have a Freewheeling lock here, but this is an 1 1/4 length cylinder. I've got to surmise that that is a typo, even though 46 may be the size 4 1 3/4. And indeed, according to the full line product catalog, 46 is 1 3/4, but we have an 1 1/4. That's a size 42, and that's how Sargent does it with their cylinders. They've got a 2-digit number for their conventional cylinders. I've done, and in the full line catalog, you'll eventually find there will be a catalog, a table that shows all the different lengths. They list 1 1/8 all the way to 3 inch, and I've certainly done, I did a 54 one time. Those were 2 3/4 because we had an unusually thick door, but the center line of the lock body itself was biased towards one side, so we needed a long cylinder to get all the way there, even though the door thickness was only maybe 3 inch. I forget the exact thickness, but we did a 54, a really long cylinder. So this would be a 42 1 1/4 length. A couple of nickel silver keys, even though one of these is the control key on this job. Okay, now can be master keyed, grandmaster keyed, construction keying available. LA is the standard keyway for standard cylinders. This is, of course, an interchangeable core cylinder, which is where the 64 prefix in the part number comes in. This is still a 64-42 cylinder is what this is. It's a large format interchangeable core in a 1 1/4 length. Master keyed, grandmaster keyed, sure. I'm not familiar with the keying theory that the factory follows, if it's total position progression or if it's rotating constant, what they would use in a particular situation. But suffice it to say, the factory would be able to fully support any sort of keying requirements that you would have for mechanical keys working these cylinders. LA is the standard keyway. Again, I don't know why HF was used on this. Doesn't really matter. We didn't specify one. Client is actually, knowing this job, the client's going to actually remove this and insert the owner's permanent key blank or interchangeable core large format. Style 4.5-inch minimum for the 8200, 4 3/4 minimum for electrical lock functions. That drawing earlier showed us the overall depth of the lock case, and that lock case, I believe, was 4 3/32 of an inch deep. This doesn't have the armor front installed on it, so it's going to be a little bit deeper than that when the armor front, so just over 4-inch. They're saying that they want a minimum style of 4.5 inch in terms of fitting the lock case in. That's what they're looking for. Obviously, I believe you'd be able to squeeze that down a small amount, but 4.5 is what the factory's telling us. Door prep is... The door prep is going to be covered when we go over the template that will be later in this video. And the template is included. They say the door prep is an ANSI A156.115 or .115W steel or wood doors. I would know it as a government 86, just an 86 edge is what I would know it as. And then you would prep function holes accordingly. But that ANSI BHMA A156.115 series will tell you, it may also tell you what the prep in the door in a steel door is to look like. There could be a couple of tangs that come out so that the cassette, this is a lock case, but it can also, it's certainly referred to as a cassette. If you use your imagination, you might see why they call it that. A couple of tangs will come out to keep that lock body from actually rattling inside the door because of that, ability for it to actually move. That keeps the lock body where it belongs. You don't want long-term degradation to the componentry that makes up the lock case itself. 10-year warranty on the lock, 2-year limited warranty on electrified locks, warranty limited to replacement of lock body and or components. Finish, you're not going to have a warranty on a finish. If you have satin chrome and the lock's 10 years old, yeah, you can expect you're going to see the brass underneath the chrome. That's just normal wear and tear. Moving on, maximum strength and durability. It is a grade 1 lock, as we stated earlier. In fact, it exceeds cycle testing requirements by 14 times grade 1 standards. That means this didn't fail till after it hit 14 million cycles. So they didn't pull the plug. They left that machine running until the lock broke or something failed on it. Case is 12-gauge heavy-duty wrought steel with a zinc dichromate plating on it. That's what makes it look yellow. That zinc dichromate is what makes it look yellow. Thickness 7/64 of an inch. That's a reference to the thickness of the body, what it's made of. 1/8 of an inch cold rolled steel inside front holds lock securely in door, 1/8 of an inch. Latch bolt is stainless steel with a 3/4 inch projection, one-piece anti-friction reversible latch. 3/4 inch. Okay, you can see that that's actually measuring longer than that because we don't have our armor front installed. This is reversible as we've demonstrated, and it features that anti-friction. That's this nylon insert that's here, anti-friction. It's really important to know that you're dealing with a 3/4 inch projection latch bolt, and that's because your door may have on the label 3/4 minimum latch throw required. If you use a cylindrical lock with a 1/2 inch latch throw, it's not compliant. You need to know it's 3/4 inch latch because if you're slapping an electric strike into the opening, they make the depth of keepers of electric strikes for 1/2 inch. I mean, they'll specify how large of a latch bolt you can insert into the keeper of the electric strike. But you have to make sure that you have one that's for 3/4 inch projection, because if it's not, if it's for a typical 1/2 inch, the bolt will go in. It just won't go all the way in, and you'll certainly notice an intermittent operation on the electric strike reliably releasing the door. You might also have a problem in the lock actually relocking because the latch is not fully extended. So that's important for a number of reasons. Deadbolt is one-piece hardened stainless steel. Our 05 function does not incorporate a deadbolt. 8200 stainless steel hubs for institutional settings specify 3- option. Optional 8200 stainless steel hubs for institutional setting. I could only imagine that stainless steel hubs over the steel that these are made of will be more durable. You can see there's not a lot of metal left in those outside corners of your hub, so that constant rotating, I think you'd want this a very strong institutional, can be thought of in alignment with high volume, maybe abusive application, abusive type of use over the lock. Stainless hubs can be done to make that lock more robust. Patent pending and or patent applied and received would be on file. Let's move to the aesthetic design. Factory goes on to talk about aesthetic design, many escutcheon and lever styles available to match a wide range of styles. Indeed, Sargent and its sister companies, especially Rockwood, they have, under the umbrella of Assa Abloy, McKinney as well, produced a document that has said, listen, if you can sketch it, send it to us. We'll see if we can make it. They've really, Assa Abloy, and again, in particular, Rockwood, my experience all but encourages requests for special requests. If they have the machinery to make it, they will absolutely make it. And as we get into the different lever, knob, rose, escutcheon designs, you'll see how thorough it is. I've done Sargent Mortise Locks, Sargent Mortise Locks, windstorm rated, Florida listed, incredibly decorative lever. They're Pebble Beach lever in a satin nickel finish. Just looks great. It looks great, and it's windstorm rated. Okay, literally. Many standard architectural grade finishes, including polished nickel and satin nickel finishes. I'm not sure why they're calling that out. It could have been, there certainly was a time when people wanted satin nickel and it just wasn't available. This document could be old enough to where they said, hey, we've got the regular stuff and we'll even give you satin nickel. Well, today it's quite typical. Upgraded to today's standards, it would say, hey, we'll give you all the standard finishes and we'll even powder coat black. Black is the new finish that everyone wants. 53 functions, including 4 electrical functions, the most in the industry for a broad range of applications. Now that 53 functions, that is, I can tell you, a very huge number. There's no doubt about that. I have been presented with a very particular set of requirements for a lock function. And as you study cylindrical locks, if you're looking at grade 1, which will give you the most option possibilities, you'll quickly find that you hit the ceiling of available functions. Mortise locks give you the most possibility of functions because they have so much real estate within which to work, to build parts, to give you the ability of lock functions. That it's, studying lock functions and their operational descriptions is its own pursuit. But the bottom line is having a large case within which to work. You can get a lot of pieces and parts pulled together to give you those functions. In the age that we live in, with classroom security being at the front of every conversation, the ability to come up with functions to react to the changing society that we live in is crucial. Versatile, offered in door thicknesses from 1 3/8 to 6 inch. Sure, absolutely they can. Available with vandalism, deterrent trim, and or secure fastener options with Torx or spanner screws for high abuse applications. This is an FW lock. This is a freewheeling lock. That freewheeling lock is going to have everything to do with what's happening on this trim, okay, in order for it to be freewheeling, and we're going to investigate what freewheeling looks like. Available with push-pull trim, like a hospital push-pull is where you would see that. Innovation, first in the industry to offer multifunctional lock body that embodies 8 functions in a single lock body. Yeah, that's handy. Easy operation, only 30 degree of lever rotation required to retract the latch bolt. That is awfully handy because you're really not moving the wrist. Okay. 0 degree. They're saying that that's 30 degree. Looks a bit heavy on 30 degree, but I'm really not able. No, I would suppose. Yeah, sure, of course. 30 degree. Right there. That's what they're talking about. Doesn't rotate down any further. Lever springs contained inside of the lock case for easier installation. So what they're referring to there is other manufacturers will give you an additional piece to install on the lock underneath the rose, giving you that spring power that you require. They're saying, don't worry about it. If you've got levers, order the 8200. If you've got knobs, order the 7800. Don't worry about the springs. They're in the case, which is typical for lots of lock manufacturers. Sargent's Revolutionary Micro Shield is available. This antimicrobial silver-based finish coating permanently suppresses the growth of bacteria, algae, fungus, mildew, and mold. EPA and NSF approved and FDA listed. So in an application where you have in every application you've got the conditions to spread, bacteria, algae, fungus, mold, mildew, they over stainless steel can put an antimicrobial coating that will retard the growth of, and this is not antimicrobial. This is for think of a cell tower, and every cell tower has a tiny little building. This is for a tiny little building on a municipality's water tank is where this is going. Very low volume use, so antimicrobial probably wouldn't make a lot of sense there. But in a hospital sense, or a school where you don't really want to transmit, sticky fingers on everything, that would be a great option. And this, of course, going to be standard practice in hospitals, is what that is going to end up being. Okay, broad offering of electromechanical configurations offer higher security for the most demanding access and egress control applications, featuring ElectroLinks quick connectors. So sure, you can get a lot of electrified options, request to exit switches, very likely switches that will tell you the condition of the latch bolt, can tell you the condition of the trim, being able to have electric latch retraction. The ability to have all the electrical control over the lock is great, but then they'll give you the ElectroLinks, which is just really which is a way to quickly connect. Wire comes out of the back of the lock body with an ElectroLinks. Then you need a wire to get through the door, ElectroLinks. Then to the McKinney hinge, ElectroLinks. Outside of the back of that, another cable, ElectroLinks. Back to your power supply, ElectroLinks. So it's really handy. Someone's got to make all these connections, wires and wire nuts. Use ElectroLinks. I would say that would be the way to go, because you're going to be completely compliant with your warranty obligation. You're not concerned over, two wires being twisted properly. And let's face it, electricians aren't exclusively installing electrified hardware. So to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible is just simply the way to go. Okay. Other manufacturers have their connectors as well, but if your door installer's connecting this stuff, they're going to walk away from twisting wires, because they're not trained in that. But putting two connectors together, okay, well, I can do that. Security, multiple security trim options available. Freewheeling, security escutcheon, and anti-vandal pull trim. Freewheeling is going to be so that the lever rotates and you're not going to damage the lever. Or I should say damage the internal lock mechanism. Security escutcheon is where you're going to have fasteners that are concealed, lower profile, less prone to vandalism, maybe even a flat plate. Anti-vandal trim is literally going to be shaped so that it's curved at the top so that you can't stand on it. You're not going to be prone to being inclined to damage the material. As we scroll through there, we'll skip past the R8200 reference, except to say that you really start to get into the studio collection of levers. And they jump right into showing you the gorgeous trims that they have. The one that I did was Pebble Beach most recently, and that is on the 4th or 5th page of the options. Or maybe it's not in here. This catalog might be a bit dated by the time I'm looking at it. Yeah, I don't see the Pebble Beach listed here. It's a decorative lever, an elegant curve to it, not curved, but just an elegant, graceful sort of curve. Condo building in Lee County, Florida. Just a beautiful trim. Okay, let's review the studio collection. Beautiful levers. A lot of it's going to be made of solid brass. Some of it's going to be made in stainless steel. Some of it's handed, much of it's not. I can tell you that we have done the Gramercy series. I've supplied the REM trim for a high-profile individual from New York, a very high-profile individual from New York that we all know for a property that he developed. Beautiful work. Actually, it was black suede powder coat, so very beautiful. Sargent had, of course, a lead time on that sort of project, but the fact of the matter is they didn't say no. They said, yes, we'll do it. We get into the roses. You can see there's a number of roses, and those square and rectangular roses are really nice and not uncommon. Different diameters of roses, different profiles. And as I scroll through all this material, the 5 pages of options. Coastal. Oh, that's what the Pebble Beach was. Pebble Beach is under the Coastal series. It's just not listed on the page that's there. Having gone through the transition of ADA compliance, very, very early 1990s, 1990 in particular, what happened was, on whatever the day was that it became federal law, on Monday, everybody was ordering knobs. At midnight that night, ADA was federal law. On Tuesday, everybody was ordering levers, and nobody asked about a knob ever again, is basically what happened. At that time, it did seem like the manufacturers were caught a bit flat-footed because there were not a lot of lever options, and what was available was really poorly engineered design because a few manufacturers had real problems with their lever return springs. Falcon had problems with it. Sargent may have too, but the Falcon T-Series springs were bad. Schlage had their D-Series was, they brought in the Rhodes lever, and that was poor at best. Then that series was shifted to the ND series. And we didn't really realize it at the time because we went from, I don't need levers really at all. Why would you need a lever? It's a knob. That's standard. To mandating levers. And then we had 3 choices of levers. And didn't seem so bad, but as time went on, there wasn't a lot of options. There were just these commercial-looking levers that no one wanted to put on their house. If you're building million-dollar condos, you're not putting a lock and deadbolt from the local home center on those doors. You're putting Mortise Locks on those exterior doors, and the trim options are necessary to be able to supply the material to the marketplace. If you look at a Sargent catalog or a Yale catalog, their sister company, or a Corbin catalog, their sister company, from 1905, you didn't have 3 lever choices. You had 30. You didn't have 3 escutcheon designs. You had 30. You had a dozen options. So we went from no levers to some levers, and we were happy, and then we realized that's not fitting the bill, to today, where I believe we're living in a renaissance period where I can't tell you which lever to pick because they all look the same. They're just great. You have countless options. Now with Assa Abloy saying, send us a drawing, we'll sketch it. And they were referring to trim as well. The Grant Park trims that are there, these are very odd geometric shapes. But the bottom line is the willingness of the manufacturer to cater to that demand is what exactly drives sales. And I'm just going to state that if Sargent is going to be supplying, 400 Mortise Locks in a 20-story condo building, yeah, they're going to make the lever that you want. You know why? Because in 20 years, you're going to need parts for those locks. And Sargent's the only source for them. So I really believe that they're going to go in to get you onto their lock, to sell you their lock, as will everybody. And the money, the long-term of being able to support that installation is what really is the payoff. It would be my guess. And I think that the availability of options is really just the hook to get the person in. And it's beautiful to begin with. As we continue to scroll through, we see, just I've had people stammer a week over just picking out a lever, and it was down to 3 that I couldn't even tell. As we continue to scroll through, you can look at the rest of the roses and the knobs. Occasionally, there is an incompatibility between stuff. I don't know that you can do there's going to be an incompatibility somewhere somehow. You might want a discussion in a concealed cylinder face that you can't get. But by and large, a lot of this stuff really is mix and match. It's just simply the bottom line. After that, we get into the escutcheon designs, which are really the standard escutcheon designs, historically normal, standard, common escutcheons from Sargent, and you can review those. They have the SAR guide, the 8200 TL option, where there is an integrated electroluminescent exit signage on the trim itself, on that escutcheon trim. That's obviously really helpful if you're looking for a way out and the lights are out because there's a fire happening somewhere. That's really crucial to be able to do that. Stairwell doors, getting people routed to the stairwells is really important. Now, they've got freewheeling trim that's there as well. Let's take a closer look at that. Now, as we're getting to that page where we're talking about freewheeling, I've mentioned a couple of times this lock is freewheeling. It's not. I shouldn't have said that at all. A freewheeling design is only available in the FE escutcheon trim. You can't have it in a rose trim. The freewheeling mortise trim is designed for areas that are susceptible to vandalism, including schools, universities, public buildings, etc. What happens is that design allows the outside lever handle to swing freely down to 70 degree in the locked mode. This eliminates resetting the trim after vandalism attempts because the lever automatically returns to its original position. So if you want a freewheeling lock, this will need to be an FE escutcheon trim, as seen on page 13 of the product catalog. Of course, there is more to the vandal-resistant freewheeling lever trim that's there. They're showing it with an L lever, just an FE escutcheon with an L lever. So vandal-resistant trim is a bit. It's too cloudy of a definition to know what's intended, in my opinion. But when they say freewheeling, yeah, sure, that it's also known as a clutch. It's a clutch mechanism, or freewheeling when it's locked. You can read the other upgrades that you get when you go to that. ADA and handicap warnings are there. They're going to detail the lever return to the door on their J, L, and P levers within a half of an inch or less. The standard thumb turn is listed there, and that's what's included in this lock. They can do a larger thumb turn that would certainly be help to be compliant with local ADA requirements, or, well, ADA is federal law, but if it is taken beyond the minimum federal law where your local jurisdiction is looking for a particular thumb turn, they have one that's 2 inch tall. Tactile warnings are there as well. Tactile warnings are actually I had a client call and did a project on maybe a 20-story building, at least 20, residential, maybe 30-story, and said the inspector came in and said he needs tactile warning on the levers. So I dug into NFPA, and indeed, it's listed there. For his particular application, a tactile warning on those stairwell doors was actually written in NFPA. Now, NFPA is a standard. If it's adopted by the local code, then it's code. And that was the case. Now, obtaining tactile warning over your levers, you don't have to have a tactile lever from the factory. You can have an applied material. Think of an incredibly heavy sandpaper with adhesive on the back that will help you be compliant. Okay, moving on to thumb turn designs. Now moving into the thumb turn design, you can see the different, on page 14, the round and square escutcheon, different thumb turn styles, and just a staggering array of different actual thumb turn handles themselves, round and rectangular, tapered versions, vandal resistant versions, handicap compliant versions, and Sargent, and then that T-turn only on the 7892 function is just, it does go back to too many levers to choose from. Emergency releases, that's going to work when you're dealing with the exterior of the lock so that you can have an ability to unlock the lock, like in a privacy function, where you're going to be able to, it is healthcare and you need to be able to get in the bathroom because someone cannot get themselves out, or a school application. Emergency key is there. Now, indicators. Indicators have become very common in this day and age in terms of requiring them. They can do indicators on the exterior door. I've seen indicators on the interior of that same door as well, along with being able to give you options in terms of what the actual indication is, whether it's colors only, or whether it's an abbreviation, or whether it's the padlock symbol, locked or unlocked. Those options are available from Sargent. Okay. Engraving would be an option on this material. Again, push-pull latches with ligature-resistant, vandal-resistant trim is available. Anti-vandal trim is nice as well, and you'll see anti-vandal trim installed, the large wing poles. You'll see them installed on the exterior doors of big box stores where they need to have egress, they need to have occasional ingress, but they want that trim to be such that it's not easily going to be vandalized as a result of its design and the integrity of the material that's being used. Getting into the 7800 series, we're going to show knobs, etc. We'll skip over that. Now we get into the functions and descriptions of the hardware. The 05 is the function that we're dealing with. Now, the 05 is a lock function that you can convert without the need for additional parts. You can convert it into an 04, a 15, or a 30 function without any additional parts. And if we look at 05, it's an office or an entry. And as we read the operational description, key outside retracts the latch bolt, also locks and unlocks the outside trim. Okay, so by virtue of that, I can put my cylinder in and I can pull the latch. I can also lock and unlock the outside trim. So I can leave it unlocked, or I can lock it. Regardless, I can always pull the latch bolt back. If it's locked, I can pull the latch bolt back. If it's unlocked, I can pull the latch bolt back. Trim inside is always free. We'll always retract the latch bolt. And if the lock is set in the locked condition, rotating the inside will not affect any change to the outside. If the outside is rigid, it'll stay rigid. The thumb turn inside locks and unlocks the outside trim. That's true. Auxiliary dead latch. Multi-purpose function that will allow you to go into a storeroom function as well, where that exterior trim is always rigid. You can do a 15 function and a 37 function. A 15 function, I need to look up because I don't even remotely have Sargent function numbers memorized. I don't see a 15 function. The 37 function is your classroom. Okay, that makes perfect sense, that we would have a classroom function. Where you can control the exterior trim by leaving it either unlocked all the time or locked all the time. And control over that is via the key on the exterior. By adding an additional cylinder, you can do the 38 function, which is going to be a double keyed version of all of this. And so on. If we scroll across the 15 function, we'll take a look at it. But it's really nice that you can, you know, oh, I ordered a classroom, I needed a storeroom. Okay, you got it right there. It's brilliant. You know, for as much as I'm sure as they want to sell locks, they probably also want to have good customer relations and making life easier on what needs to be ordered. And as we continue to scroll through the page after page of functions, you can feel that they have a superb quantity of available options. The 15 function, by the way, is just a passage. So if you were to literally remove the thumb turn and the cylinder, you have a passage, and you can set it to operate as a passage in all instances. Obviously, in that case, you've got some holes that you don't need, but that lock body is going to work as a passage. So then they get into the dummy trim, which has no lock body at all. They can also get into the format of the lock body being deadbolt preparations, either a cylinder by thumb turn, a cylinder by cylinder, a cylinder only, a classroom style where there's cylinders on both sides, and a thumb turn. And a classroom style deadbolt will always retract the deadbolt but can never throw it or project it from the inside. That's the definition of classroom. Into electrical functions and monitoring options. In the last project we did, we certainly had some fail secure locks with an RX option was there. So to talk about some of the overview of the options, you can have electrical control over the lock where it locks or unlocks the outside lever. You're not going to have a physical necessary retraction of the latch bolt, but control over the exterior trim, whether it's locked or unlocked. You can do that fail safe or you can do that fail secure. Fail safe is, and the basic or the basis by which electrical functions are defined is what is the state of the lock when you take it out of the box. When you take it out of the box, it's unpowered. Okay. So is it fail safe or fail secure when it's unpowered? Fail secure is that when the power is cut, it's locked. Fail safe is the opposite. When the power is cut, it would be unsecured. Now the options you can do, and these are going to be single pole, double throw, which is known as a type C switch. An RX option is really, it's called request to exit. And there's going to be a micro switch so that when you operate the lock, that micro switch is either from normally open to normally closed or from normally closed to normally open for that moment, and it will communicate to something else. A common RX request to exit option is when you have a horizontal bar, a touch bar, and you touch the bar, it will then open the circuit to the magnetic lock, the electromagnetic lock, allowing you to egress. Typical option for request to exit. A request to exit can also, I suppose, turn on a light, turn on an annunciator, turn off a light. It can, I'm sure, create an entry in an audit log. It's just a micro switch. When that lever is hit, the condition of that switch is reversed. LX option, that is latch bolt monitor. What if I'm trying to get through that door and I know it's got a request to exit switch? I'm going to try to Lloyd the latch bolt to get in. You can have it with a latch bolt monitor so that you know if somebody is trying to tamper with that latch bolt. Deadbolt monitor as well. Switch mounted internally in lock body that indicates the deadbolt position, meaning you can know whether or not that deadbolt is thrown. You can remotely know that. Those are the typical functions that you're going to see on locks. As it continues through the 8200, it gets into the accessories that would go with electrified options. Obviously, through-wire hinges, power supplies. Then it gets into the cylinder aspect, the mechanical, the cylinder subcomponents that would normally go with a lock set, and you can see the cylinder number, 41 through 56, the lengths. You can see that standard Yale cam that's there. That's got that small little, you know, it's a skew. That's normal for Yale. That sort of Yale cam is typical. The 40 series cylinder is the Mortise cylinder that we're dealing with, a solid brass cylinder body. Goes on to talk about other types of cylinders, and let's talk about them now. So there's also the option to do a hotel function cylinder, and those hotel function cylinders operate in a very unique way, where they will permit an emergency key to pass the cylinder. So what really happens is, and there's, depending on the cylinder technology, and I'm not an expert on it, but I understand how it works. Basically, your operating key, the key, you know, if you had a hotel that still took a mechanical key, okay, if you had that first, the client can go in with the key, retract the latch bolt, get in, no problem, lock the deadbolt on the inside. What they can't do with the standard operator's key is to throw the deadbolt from the outside. A special key will not only operate the lock, but it will retract the latch bolt from the outside. It's called the innkeeper's key, is what I've seen it referred to. And there's different ways to do it. I have seen a physical pin on the back of the cylinder that will restrict the movement of the key, the client key, to rotate all the way around, because you got to go past 0 to get that deadbolt to throw. Whereas the innkeeper's key will then engage the sleeve that will move that pin, and the whole cylinder can turn. I'm referring to Master Ring from Corbin in that regard. How other manufacturers do it, I'd have to study their technical drawing. But the bottom line is the innkeeper's key, or what they're calling the emergency key, will allow full operation of the unit, whereas the client's key is not full operation over that specialty cylinder. Signature series cylinders are basically protected keyways. Kiso is a keyway that we would know as dimple keys. The key blades are quite different. They're European. Kiso is a European company. They had have a working relationship where the dimple technology is on their keys. That's their Kiso. I'm not an expert in their degree cylinders. It's restricted. That's a relationship between the end user and the factory, and almost sometimes directly, otherwise through someone on the behalf of the end user. They have an exposed barrel key that's there, and what that really is for is when you have concealed cylinder trim, where you'll have an escutcheon, and rather than having the entire Mortise cylinder that you can see on the outside, all that they really get into is showing you only the face of the cylinder plug. Previously in the catalog, they certainly will show a concealed escutcheon. I'll see if I can scroll up and get to it. And it's really nice to have that concealed cylinder, forgive me. It is certainly a very attractive way to have your lock organized in terms of the face of the cylinder. It's just a better aesthetic. They do actually refer to it on page 12, where they show the LE3 and LE4 concealed cylinder, so you can see just the head of the cylinder popping out. Again, it's a really nice look on the cylinder. Obviously doesn't permit you to just use any cylinder in the future, but nonetheless, it is certainly a very clean look. We scroll, there is the Mortise thumb turn, that's there as well. If you have a double cylinder option and you want a thumb turn control over the interior, but you want a Mortise cylinder to operate that for whatever reason, possibly looks, or maybe, oops, I drilled the hole on the wrong side of the door and now I need a thumb turn. And now there's a hole, you can come with that. That's really the most common way to do it. The cylinders and rosettes continue through the option of old style removable core. I am not familiar with the old style Sargent large format core, so I won't speak about that. The plastic construction core is nice. That will, if you're doing large format, it'll snap in there and just you can easily operate it with a coin or a flat screwdriver. 63 is the option for their large format removable core. The lock we have here is a 64 option. And the 63 basically is an option for the core, so you're going to get the housing. This client ordered a 64, and that means that it is a temporary construction core that will be included in the housing. So what I'm driving at is that's 63. Now we have 64. We're doing a project, this small building outside of the municipality's water reservoir tank. Want to be able to operate it until the owner brings their final permanent cylinder into the mix. 7300B interchangeable cores, they're small format. In today's day and age, every manufacturer seems to be making parts for every other manufacturer's material. If you have an existing system, small format, which would be known as Best, Frank Best patented the small format core, I think in 1921 or thereabouts, or Walter Schlegel patented his cylindrical lock design in 1921. But then you've got Best and its clones, which would be Falcon and Arrow and everyone else. A lot of large installations use small format. There are a lot of advantages to small format that are very attractive. Although you might say to yourself, well, I don't want to use, the ability to run a small format core into a Sargent lock gives you the freedom to select the manufacturer of lock you like and maintain the cylinder construction type keying system that you have. So you might decide that you're not going to use Sargent locks. It might be a taxpayer, it might be a public job, and the way the specifications are written are show me locks from 3 manufacturers. Give me Schlegel, give me Sargent, give me Best. Well, they might say, I think we need to go with Best because we've got 1,000 doors and they're all existing Best core over in this other building. And someone might say, well, that's fine, but I can do the Sargent and I can do the Schlegel and I can do the Best. They will all take small format. So you might have it arranged in such a fashion where you can have Sargent with a small format compatibility. Freedom to the end user is just simply the bottom line. And I'm a fan of that because it really allows the hallmark or the advantages of a particular installed system to speak on their own. If there are advantages to small format that you believe in, or if you're the end user and that's what you're going to use, that's what you're going to use. You can run a Sargent lock and keep your existing system in place. You can see different roses and blocking rings that go under the cylinders. We do have the 1 kb here, I think, yeah, the 1 kb on the right hand side. They do refer to that different tapered cylinder collar. You can do that as well if you wanted a tapered look. This is literally a more petite version. It's not tapered out. What I like about the tapered version, even though I don't love how it looks, there'd be nothing that would prevent me from getting a wrench over that. But if this was tapered, it might be more difficult to get a wrench. I could put a wrench on there and crush this down so I can bite to the head of the cylinder. So you might want a collar like the 1 SB that it's going to be tapered. They talk about, they've got that square rosette, which is really neat. They talk about above there the 21 option, lost ball construction system. The Sargent construction keying system protects the building owner by providing temporary master keying during the construction period. So the bottom line is how that works is you'll have a key cut, okay? And that depth of that cut is going to be a 4. And let's say that a 4 is deeper than a 2. Let's just go with that. So I can have my pin installed in my cylinder plug so that I've got my ball and my pin, and that equals to work. Well, what'll happen is when I insert a key that is cut more shallow, okay, I will operate just at the ball line of that condition. But if I were to operate in such a condition on the cut of a key, where now my key is cut, now these are really bad drawings, I apologize, where my key is cut such that the ball resides up in the top of the cylinder, as soon as I, the point being is, let me organize my thoughts. Okay, I'm basically on the right track. When my key pushes the ball up into the top of the cylinder, and then I turn the cylinder plug, and that ball, because it's under spring-loaded tension, is going to pop into a little dimple that's been drilled. Probably looks not unlike that dimple in the face of that construction core. It will then reside inside of that dimple drilled around the circumference of the cylinder plug and will forever stay there. So if my cut on my key was a 4, and then I had a number, and then if I had a number 2 cut, I was going to force that ball bearing up into the top of the cylinder, and I turn my plug, it would pop into that little hole and stay captive there. Now, any prior key that was dependent on the height of that ball bearing, let's just say it's a 2, will no longer work. That's your construction key. That's your lost ball construction. Lost ball means that it didn't go anywhere. It's just not where it needs to be to make that lock operate. The cylinder could be taken apart. I've done projects where the guy said, yeah, I put in the permanent core, the permanent key, and I tripped the ball. Well, bring the locks into me, so I'd have to take them apart, pull the ball out, put it back into the chamber, then put the cylinder back together. But that's how that works. It's a very effective way to construction key. Easy, inexpensive. You know, from a perspective of having one chamber only, you know, a 2-step increment off of where it would otherwise be, if you were someone in the know and you realized it was a lost ball construction method, probably wouldn't be difficult to copy that original key and then understand how you have to manipulate it to have a permanent key. I've never heard of that being a problem. It's just knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Now, as we scroll through, we get to page 36. You can see a lot of cylinders, a lot of cams. The different cams are going to be required to operate other Sargent types of locks. Every certain functions are going to require a different cam. The good news is that almost all functions, almost all of the 53 are going to take this standard cam, the 13-0664. Okay, almost all of them will take that. They have a handy chart to tell you what length of cylinder you need based on the door thickness. Okay. And yep, they're showing you the different cylinder requirements based on the trim that you have, based on the door thickness. That's all very handy to have available. No guesswork involved. How, you know, my door is 2 1/4 inch thick. How long of a cylinder do I need? You know, that tells you that information. Cams for interchangeable core are there as well. This, of course, isn't the 13-0664. This would be the 6300 cam because it is interchangeable core. Strikes and fronts are going to come up next. So I said earlier that I would talk about what I didn't like about the strike. That's one awfully huge hole that's installed there. And what's missing is the dust box. There is no dust box or box behind this strike. You actually have to ask for it. I don't like that. That should be included with the lock, in my opinion. If I'm doing knockdown drywall frames that do not have mortar guards or mortar boxes like a masonry frame will, I've got the encroachment of the particulate of the wall creeping through my frame. And if I didn't know I had to order all those separate, I'm going to walk through as the owner and look inside of there, and I'm going to see Sawzall cut wood and drywall and particulate. I'm not going to want to see that. That dust box should be tossed in there, would be my opinion. I also don't like it because this strike is non-handed. This will account for either any hand of lock. That makes life easy when you're dealing with, being, in the world we live in, reversibility. This lock will work, 4 to 5 different functions right out of the box. I would really prefer that they at least offer handed strikes, or give me only the hole that I need. If it's a non-deadbolt function, give me only the hole I need. Have a flat lip version of that as well. Give me a curved lip version. Make this the standard strike, but give me the option to go with a better looking strike where I don't have a huge hole in there so that I can pick that up. But the dust box should be included. Open back strike, that's an unusual gizmo that you don't see very often. An open back strike is used exclusively in a pair of doors. This is a scenario by which you can where you can have a situation where both doors have door closers, both doors can open. You have a lock set on one door, you might have auto flush bolts on the other door. If you were to have auto flush bolts on your door, and that door, well, in a Mortise lock, you're going to need a Mortise lock application. You'll need an open back strike in this scenario. Active door has the lock set, no problem all day long. That's going to work just fine. And in this scenario, you have the active door opens. The inactive door now can be operated. Okay. Now, let's say that that inactive door closes first. That type of scenario, you have no problem. The inactive door closes, the active door comes, closes, and latches. Everything's beautiful in the world. Well, what if you have that same scenario and your active door opens, your inactive door is held open, your active door closes, and now your inactive tries to close and ding, it hits the back of the latch. This door is already closed. Your inactive door is hitting the back of the latch. Well, if you have an open back strike, that inactive door will close right up to it, and now you can't open your active door because now the inactive door is latched as a result in this scenario of your automatic flush bolts. Open back strikes are uncommon in my experience in traditional pairs of doors with locks. Where you'll see them all the time is there's a condition of a pair of doors, both doors have exit devices. There's a Mortise exit device on the active. There is a surface vertical rod exit device on the inactive. That inactive door, inactive even though they operate independently of each other, will have an open back strike. That is a very handed strike. You need to order the hand of the strike, meaning if you order the strike as a standalone product, you have to specify the hand. The hand of that strike is the hand of the door that the strike is working with in terms of the lock. So if you had a left-hand reverse active door, you're going to install this strike on the right-hand reverse inactive. You don't order a right-hand reverse. You would order a left-hand reverse open back strike because it pertains to the primary door that it's being used with. Okay, you'll see the outside front plate. That's just a reference to the armor front. You can order new armor fronts. There are rabbited door kits. A rabbited kit is not an unusual circumstance. In new construction, I think it's certainly uncommon, but if you are looking at where I see rabbited door kits all the time is in colonial America, New England, locks that have been around for 100+ years. Those are rabbited doors. There's a 1/2-inch rabbit on the edge of the door. Running out of space. That's a rabbited door condition. Okay, you certainly need to have the ability to contend with this sort of condition. And it's the regular sort of lock that you're going to get. You're just going to get some extra parts to make it look like it's rabbited. It's a regular lock. At least that's what I've seen. Now, there are manufacturers who literally have a rabbited profile to the edge of their lock, and that stuff certainly exists. The deadbolt strike is also listed there for your format, a more petite footprint of a mortise case. Now comes the mechanical options, and the mechanical options, what makes Sargent simultaneously intimidating and incredibly expressive is the several pages worth of mechanical options as a prefix. Let's take a look at some of those. I certainly can't tell you if there's one option that's more common than any other option, because it just seems like when you get a Sargent part number, there's very likely a lot of prefixes. You know, generally I see it as it pertains to a cylinder, you know, some sort of modification to the cylinder, either a DG1 or DG2, degree, high security or restricted key system. I'll see that all the time. And it might be because there's a lot of prefixes that are cylinder related is why I'd see those more often. But what's nice about the prefixes is that they group them together so that you can relatively easily find what you're dealing with. And that's a hallmark of the Sargent line, you know, the concept of a prefix. And while intimidating, I suppose, as long as you have the legend by which to determine what you're asking for or what you're trying to interpret, you're in good shape. That table is there that will show you the different lengths of cylinders on the bottom of page 40 and translates that to a Sargent size number. And then, of course, we get to the ubiquitous how to order chart, which is incredibly helpful. Tells you how to put a part number together. And what I like about what Sargent's doing is they give you the page number to refer to. So if you're trying to put together a proper lock, you know, not only do you see how they want you to build the part number, but you see where to refer back to in order to determine what options are available. Following up there, they get into the chart of all of the available finishes that are listed. An ever-growing list. WSP, white suede powder coat. That's relatively new. I bet they can do red as well. I've seen red come through on some other marketing data that I've received from ASA Abloy companies. Continuing to scroll through, they have, you know, a reference to packaging and the weights, other additional information on the Gramercy locks in particular, of some discussion on the multifunction lock body. That's nice. That will show you what they're referring to and what functions you can put together based on what you have. I don't know that Sargent is the only company that does that, but they're the only ones I'm aware of that does it. Then, at the very end of the catalog, you have your architectural specification. That's going to be for your architectural hardware consultant that is working with an architect to lift the data off of the architectural spec to put that into the spec book in order for you to clearly convey what it is exactly that you're looking for in terms of specifying a Sargent product, and that is necessary for you to do that. So that exhausts the product catalog. Now we get into the installation instructions. And before we do that, let's get into the template itself. It would be helpful to know how to... Now, we're going to stand by. We're going to do... Let's do the cut sheet just to review that. Then we'll do the template. Then the installation instructions. And then, of course, we'll do the parts manual. We'll just look at that data that's there. Now, the cut sheet, it's a 2-page document. It's just an overview, something very handy that will give you a simple outline of what you're looking at, not a beleaguered 50-page document, which gives you a very simple overview. Now the template. I have always liked Sargent templates, and I have mortised doors for Sargent locks more than once. And I always appreciated seeing the reference to the hole that's required based on the function. To me, it keeps things really simple and straightforward, where they would then have a table by which to determine what size they're referring to. Okay, so in a single sheet of paper that does not have an overwhelming amount of dimensional data drawn, Sargent does a great job. So we've got an 8205, and let's focus on that. Let's take a closer look at this document. And admittedly, much of the template is dedicated to just special circumstances or notes or very odd or less common functions. And if you didn't have those on the same front piece of paper, it would certainly be less clouded with information. But a very clean template, certainly, in my opinion. So you do have to know how to prep the edge of the door. You do have to have the mortise pocket drilled first, or mortised first. If you're dealing with a fire-rated wood door, a fire-rated hollow metal door, or a metal door at all, you're certainly not going to be prepping that in the field. That door is going to come to you already mortised, especially if it's a fire-rated door. It would not be within your scope of permissible operations to do on the door, to do a mortise lock pocket in the door, unless you were a listed, licensed machiner for that material. So that prep is going to be, that armor front, again, is 8-inch tall, 1.25 inch wide. They're showing you the thickness of all of that is 7/32 of an inch. And that's how deep the plate is going to be. Well, then your body prep is going to be, they're showing 6.5 inch tall. You'd make it 1 inch wide, I'm quite sure. What's dimension B? Dimension B is basically 29/32. Back in the old days, we would just make that 1 inch. It certainly doesn't need to be 1 inch, but a 29/32 bit is not necessarily easy to find. Template's clearly calling out 29/32 wide. You would not have trouble making that 1 inch, except that it would be a clear deviation from what the template calls out, is the bottom line. Now, 6.5 tall. Dimension B is the width of the prep, and that dimension will change based on the lock, but our 8200 requires 29/32. Dimension A is going to be 1.25 inch. We've talked about that. Then dimension C is going to be the depth of the mortise body. Now, they told you earlier that they want a 4.5 inch deep mortise. They're saying that the case itself is 4 1/8. And I saw it 4 3/32 or whatever it actually was listed at. Now, okay, so they're showing you in the edge, in the center of the page, 2 arrows in A. That means a cross section. So if you look immediately above that, section AA is showing you what the edge of that door is going to look like. And they have drawn it as a beveled edge door, certainly. Now, and I don't see any notations on the, well, no, it's definitely there. Okay, I do see a notation. So the determination of bevel, certainly a topic worth discussing. Not every manufacturer makes it clear on their template, even though they really should. So I can sketch quickly four edges. 4 ways to treat a door: square, beveled, radiused, and mortised, or rabbited, I should say. The question is, it's 2 3/4 backset, but from where? If you've ever drilled a door for a lock, and you drilled on both sides, and you put your lock on and you scratch your head and say, for some reason, those holes, I measured them right. They don't line up. What went wrong? Well, probably what you're encountering is that you were planning, well, you didn't realize it was a beveled edge door. So the back set is defined as 1/8 in 2. And what that means is for every 2-inch in door thickness, the deviation is 1/8 of an inch. If that were a 2-inch thick door, okay? So if that door was 2-inch thick, the distance from here to here would be 1/8 of an inch. Well, our door is 1 3/4, so it's not quite 1/8 of an inch, but that doesn't really tell us where to measure. Backset is measured from the center line, and they clearly indicate center line of bevel. Okay? So backset is actually measured from the center line of the thickness of the door. So that definition is important because the definition doesn't care the thickness of the door. It doesn't change. For every 1/8 of an inch, for every 2 inches in door thickness, that bevel is going to be 1/8. Different. It's also known as 3 degree. So the bottom line is you need to decide when you are measuring on the edge of the door. If you have a square edge door and you measure back to 2 3/4 and strike your vertical center line to reference your function holes, you measure that on both sides of the door. But when you take a beveled edge door and you hook your tape measure on the pull side of the door, you're really going to be not far enough in because your tape measure's askew by almost 1/16 of an inch. And if you measure on the small side of the door, the push side, and you go over 2 3/4, you're going to be too far over. Now, it's just 1/16 of an inch, not even actually, on either side. But when you take the inside being off that much and the outside being off that much, now you've got a distance. If that's off here, now that's off here, now you got something to deal with, and that's where the problem comes in. So you have to determine from the center line of the thickness of the door how far askew or biased you are, and then compensate for that. With Mortise locks, you can be a little off, but just a little. And if you're off on your function holes, it will take an otherwise very reasonable amount of time to prep the door into a 2-hour, fist fight, really. I've been off with function holes. There's no elegant way to fix that. And if you've got escutcheon trim, if you've got sectional trim, you don't have a lot of play around the rows. If you have escutcheon trim, you can kind of get away with being, less than perfect on your function holes, but you do need to strike those accurately. So that's how backset is determined, from the center of the thickness of the door. Okay. Now moving on further, we get to talking about the center line of the strike. We've talked about how far back to put it. The vertical height, that's going to be wherever it's going to be in terms of, what is the preparation that's being done. If you do have to prep the lock body maybe to a jamb that's already prepped, or you have to prep both, you do have to have a working knowledge of the center line of the strike and its relationship to the center line of the lock body. The bottom line is this: in a cylindrical lock, you take that strike and that cylindrical lock, and the center line of the latch is the center line of the strike every single time. That is not so with a Mortise lock. The relocation of that is 3/8 of an inch lower on the door for the lock body, and the pure and simple reason for that is, if this was a deadbolt function, if the center line of the two of these were put together, I would not be able to fit my deadbolt into the strike. So I am just eyeballing this as being the center line of each. They have to physically move the lock case down so that in this big giant hole I could fit the deadbolt. If they didn't, that deadbolt would be riding way up here. So they literally reposition the lock body down 3/8 of an inch, and then everything happily fits. That is an absolute standard in the industry. I know that there is a lock that does not observe that 3/8. It might be 5/16, and it might be a card reader by Kaba. a card access, like an E-Plex lock. Don't quote me, but you do need to check that it's 3/8. 99.99% of all of them are 3/8, because you've got an 8-inch lock body, you've got a 4 7/8 strike. You can only play with that so much, so it's not going to be like one is 9/6. It's not going to be like one is 11/16 or 1/16. It'll be 3/8 right in there. Now, how to measure that? Well, it's super simple once you kind of have some experience doing it. And I fall back on just having certain dimensions memorized. For instance, if we're talking about the lock location of Steelcraft or Amweld or Kawani, and certainly others, I just don't remember. I know on a 7-foot door that the top of the door, the inside of the header to the center line of the strike is 43 11/16. I know that. I also know that the top of the door to the center of the mortise pocket is 43 15/16. I happen to know that. But if you were clever, you realized 43 11/16 and 43 15/16, that's only 4/16 difference that's there. Well, that's because when you're measuring on the door, if you measure on the door, you're already 1/8 of an inch lower than the reference point on the frame. Okay. And to me, what makes that easier to understand is, in that same scenario, if I had a cylindrical lock, the top of the door to the center line is 43 9/16. Center line is 43 9/16 on a cylindrical lock. When you go to an 86 edge or a mortise lock, it's 43 15/16. That's your 3/8 of an inch. Okay. But the reference point has changed of where you're measuring it from. So I do simply rely on knowing a hollow metal door manufacturer's standard locations, and that makes it easy to always remember what my center line is, because you do have to adjust that mortise lock body 3/8 of an inch lower in relationship to the strike when you hold them together. But if you're going to measure on the door, you have to measure on the door for the lock. And if you're going to measure on the frame, you have to measure on the frame for the lock, because you have that 1/8 of an inch from the top of the door to the underside of the header. Looking at the template, you might say to yourself, okay, they've got me jumping around here with locations, but there's always a defining start point. You can easily define the top of the door to the center of the lock case. You can easily do that. You will have your center line of lock body. Then from there, it's going to give you a dimension of 1 51/64. My tape measure doesn't read in 64ths, so it would be nice, 1.797, almost 1 13/16. So anyway, it would be nice if that was at no greater than 30 seconds, because that's your starting point, center line of the body to the center line of your hub, of right here. Center line of lock body down to the center line right here. That's 1 51/64. If you have a CNC tool, you give it to it in the 64th. You give it to it in the 10,000ths. It doesn't matter. That would be great. You're doing it with a 25-foot Stanley ruler. You know what is really great, actually, all kidding aside, the best thing in the world is, for a carpenter, a finished carpenter, is this. I can show you 1.797 on this. Okay, so that's really nice. So you've got your first set of holes. Then you go to the left side of the template to give you the rest. But before you start drilling anything, you're going to look at your horizontal column of required holes. Your O5 function, you can see that there's an asterisk. If your lock predates that manufacturing date of 15 years ago by the time of making this video, you're going to use a different set of holes, so be mindful of that. If it's new lock, you've got it. You're doing the 1 hole, the 2 hole, 4, 5, 7, and 8 holes. Sounds like a lot more than necessary, but the bottom line is 7 and 8 are the same hole, basically. 4 and 5, you're going to have a cylinder and a thumb turn. And then you're going to have your 1 and 2 hole. That's the same hole. So they could have, just said 1 hole is through, because I think 7 and 8 will... Oh, they're not, actually. There are a couple of instances where the 7 and 8 is not all the way through the door, so that's why they have to break that out. The 1 and 2 hole, again, if you've got one-sided locks, yeah, sure. Those won't go through the door. So you know that you've got your vertical center line. We've talked about backset. Center line of the lock down to the center line of the hub hole, you've got a dimension. Then from there, you can hop up to your cylinder at 3 7/8. You can hop up to your thumb turn at 2 15/30 seconds. But you have to be mindful that they're showing you all the possible holes on both sides of the door. So what I would always do is I would print the template out and I would take my marker and I would just cross off the things to ignore. Giving me less to look at is the bottom line. So you're not going to drill a 5 and a 6 through the door because your 05 function only requires a 5 on the inside of the door. So in the lower left and lower right hand corner, it defines inside and outside of door, interior or exterior. The question ultimately becomes, what is the outside of a door? Well, you do have to have a working knowledge of what's the keyed side or the secured side of the door. Okay. It trips some people up. Well, it's a privacy lock, so there's no key. No, there's no key, you're right, even though there could be. But what would be the secured side of the door? That's going to be the exterior or the outside. And then, you know, as I've told countless people, just do a reality check. Draw on your life experiences to help you determine what should this be like. We've all used a bathroom, and we've all locked the lock. So we can kind of relate to what is the interior inside or the exterior outside of the door. So now you've got your holes, your one hole, which is going to be where your spindles go through, and then your lever screw studs, those are going to go through the door. They're going to go in at an angle. You'll have your thumb turn on the inside, you have your cylinder on the outside. I always would prep the body first, the mortise pocket first, because then I'm only drilling about 3/8 of an inch thick to the cavity that's been created. The most important thing when you're laying these holes out is to double check them. Measure twice, cut once. It is an axiom that applies to prepping doors as much as anything else, if not more so. And I always like, especially with mortise locks, once I'm sure my holes are in the right location, using a pencil, I will then center punch the hole so that when my drill bit starts its hole, it doesn't, you know, walk before it pierces into what it's drilling into, especially with a steel door. Wood door's not as bad if it's a closed cell wood like maple or birch, but you really want to have that bit start in the right location. Looking at the rest of the template, I don't see anything else here to really draw on in terms of mandatory to discuss. So at this point, let's move into the installation instructions. Now, as we look at the installation instructions, they show us how to manipulate the multifunction capability. We've discussed that. You can review that. If you've got an 8205, you don't need to change the function. And then they have that function list right in the center of the page, which is nice. That's a very nice summarization of the lock. They also talk about how to rehand the lock. We covered that much earlier in this video. What I like a lot about the upper right-hand corner and their use of QR codes, which is very, very nice. It gives us basically an exploded parts drawing that shows us the piece parts that need to go together. And the funny part here is the non-loosening wave ring, which is number 19 and is included. That's going to be for your your exterior side, which they have one in there, but the interior will get one as well. The non-loosening wave ring is already buried inside of the exterior. This is a manufactured component that it's ready to go, already done at the factory. So no need to work on that. Looking at the rest of the parts, it's going to really end up being simple to put this together. The lock body is going to go in the door, certainly. You'll secure that. I like to secure it with the 2 screws and back it off a quarter turn, a half a turn. Allows that lock body to move, so when I get the trim in, I can have it on there very marginally loose so that I can make sure the function works correctly, and then tighten the screws. Test operation. The interior components are simple and straightforward. You've got part number 6, which is your spindle. Part 5 is the inside adapter and plate assembly. Then 3 and 19, your rose, and then your non-loosening wave washer. Your interior lever with its set screw is going to secure down onto the spindle itself. So what I'm trying to say is I appreciate a lock manufacturer's set of instruction when it shows set of instructions, when it shows me the bill of materials. It shows me, hey, listen, before you start chiseling out your door and taking locks off and throwing them away, here's everything you're supposed to have. So get it all laid out and understood. And I would even say familiarize yourself with the terms so that when you're looking at the installation instructions, you know what part you're really looking for. On page 2, which is really step 1, important, check template and prep the door accordingly. We've discovered the finer points of how to machine our door, and we've been working on that, and that's done. We're looking at we've got is the mortise case is in, and we've brought the interior, we've brought the exterior through the door. Now it's now you've got a couple of posts. That spindle is spring loaded. That's really important, and the spring is actually very ingeniously buried down into the lever, and that keeps the spindle firmly seated inside the hub. You always want that to be there naturally. So at this point, you're going to bring your, this assembly is looking like this. Your hub is your spindle is going to go inside of there. Oh, I've got it backwards. Ew. They're showing a small screw that's going to hold that together, and indeed you do have that small screw. This portion is going to go onto the door. Then through these 2 holes, you're going to run your 2 threaded fasteners into those lever screw posts. Now what you have is the inside mounting plate bolted to the exterior side. At that point, your non-loosening wave washer I just popped in there. Now you're going to rotate it onto the threaded stem. That you'll just put on hand tight. Okay, then at that point, the last thing you have to do is to bring your lever, set screw in the side, bring that down, and then you're going to tighten that set screw. And your project is done at that point. And that non-loosening wave washer is really handy because that rose does need to be kept stiff and taut or tight to the face of what it's being installed to, and that's what that does. It keeps it nice and locked down in place. Okay. What we've really done is jumped into steps, or through into steps 9 and 10. You do have to install the cylinder naturally, and installing the cylinder, I would be lying if I told you I didn't use the key as a means by which to help get the cylinder installed. In fact, I will always run the cylinder into the lock body first, just to make sure any micro burrs that are in the threads are cleared and cleaned out. Because I don't want to try to, if it doesn't smoothly, and if you notice what I do, I'll go backwards. I kind of go backwards to help me determine, to get me seated. And if I start to go clockwise and it's not turning, I'll go backwards again until I can start to feel, there it is. I feel that it seats itself. It feels like it seats, and then you can smoothly rotate. Okay. You do want to make sure that that screw is pulled out, which I had done so before. It controls the yoke that's there, and you'll notice that there is a slot on the side of the cylinder. That's where that yoke is going to sit into to keep that cylinder where it needs to be. So that is a unique thread. It's 1 5/32. I believe it's 32 threads per inch. UNS The UNS is the thread type, and it is a the finest thread that you can get, and it's done so for strength. And you certainly want that cylinder to be very much connected to the lock body, because you don't have a lot of thickness there. How many threads are there? 3, maybe 4. Not a lot of connection, so that's why the threads are so fine, and that's why it's so critical to get that threaded very well. If you cross thread that, there is unfortunately not an elegant way to fix that. So be mindful. Do that deft counterclockwise till it feels like it seats, then in a practice run when it's on your desk, and a practice run, sometimes doing it in the flat is really not the best idea, because the cylinder is so substantial in its weight. It does help cross-thread it. I find doing it this way and backing it off and then starting it is the way that works for me. Cylinder should be in. The instructions literally say that the Sargent logo needs to be at the top. Yeah, you can't install, you don't want to install this upside down, because now your cam is not in the right orientation. Obviously your thumb turn needs to get installed. Now back to the set screw. There is thread lock on there, and that's nice that they put thread lock on there. I really wish there was a better system by which to keep the inside lever on. I would like there to be a spanner collar here so I could thread that onto the door. Set screws to me are maintenance issues. I don't prefer them. I would like a redesign on that at a very minimum. My opinion. They can't really thread the spindle, because your door, if it's 1 3/4, the door doesn't measure 1.75. It's 1.71, 1.701, 1.72. And that's obviously not going to work very well. Although, anyway, I've not heard of any problems of Sargent levers coming off on the inside, so it's obviously not a problem, or they would have re-engineered it. Then, of course, you've got your thumb turn that is going to go on the inside. And what I do with these thumb turns is I will get them placed on the door, and I'm going to make sure the lock works really well. I'm going to make sure that it's vertical, and then I'll mark my hole, and then I'll put my pre-drill my hole, and then put my screw in. Some extra parts here that I'm not familiar with. Oh, yeah, of course. That would be the mounting plate for this. The mounting plate has to go down to the door. Let's get to where they show us the thumb turn rather than winging this. And unfortunately, it took scrutinizing the installation instructions to see that the thumb turn installation instructions are in the bag, or on the bag that that the thumb turn comes in. So let's take a look at that. Insert a liner lock into the side plate. Okay, so the bottom line is they have a tool here that's called the aligner, and that is going to permit you to insert the aligner into down into the lock, okay, so that your mounting plate is then going to be perfectly centered on your lock body. That will insert into the lock body, okay. You can then attach that directly to your door, and then your thumb turn will be attached to that tapped hole that's up in the top of the unit, okay. I would think you're going to need to possibly drill the face of the door a little bit for that screw. Let's see what it says. Yeah, drill a 3/16 diameter hole, 1/16 of an inch deep, in the door for rose mounting screw clearance. The plastic liner you can discard once you're done. Apply the thumb turn or emergency button as shown by screwing rose to the back plate with the 632 machine screw provided. Whether it be a coin emergency turn or your thumb turn, the installation is the same. installation instructions are there. I'm not sure why they don't have it just on the paperwork itself. We just printed 500,000 installation instructions and we forgot to tell people how to install the thumb turn. I got an idea. Let's put it on the packaging. Maybe. Who knows? Doesn't matter, but what does matter is all the information is here. And other than having other trims, escutcheon trim that would have a couple of extra steps like additional screws, our work is done with all of these parts. Sargent is very elegant in that you can, with the exception, I think, of the non-tightening wave or loosening wave washer, that's the only thing that you kind of say to yourself, where does that go? Well, it kind of has to fit inside of here, but other than that, in my opinion, you know, Frank Lloyd Wright said, it's got to look good. I take it, it's got to look good before it works good. And if it works good, it's not good enough if it doesn't look good. And Sargent does both of those. It works well, but first it looks good in its elegant simplicity when it comes to installing the product. It's straightforward. It's approachable. It's not hard to install these. And if the function holes are spot on, then you will tear through these really, really fast. I mean, to install this, you need a number 2 Phillips. You need an 1/8 inch Allen wrench for your set screw. You might need a number 3 Phillips for the... Yeah, you'd want a number 3 for the holding the lock body in if you have a wood door. But other than that, it's a number 2. Number 2 screwdriver, 1/8 of an inch Phillips. You might want to chisel if you're doing wood doors and the prep needs to be just finessed ever so slightly. But other than that, actually that's probably the only thing missing on here. Oh, no, it's not. It says lower right-hand corner of page 1, tools required, Phillips, standard size, 1/8 inch, Allen wrench, Phillips and flat tip screwdriver. That's going to be to reverse this, flat tip screwdriver. So a number 2 Phillips, I think a number 3 if it's a wood door. A number 2 would probably work, but I think a 3 is the right size for that Phillips that's right there. So really, really elegant. The last thing to kind of review, and it's not much to review, but and it's very handy, is the fact that there is a parts drawing, and the 05 function is right in the beginning of the unit, right in the beginning of the document. You pull that cover off, that's what you're looking at. Those are the parts. No more, no less. Looks like maybe a few less parts than standard, but those are the parts. Those are what's in that lock case, the item number, and then the part number that you would order. I've sold lots of parts for lots of Sargent locks and exit devices, door closers. I can't tell you that there's any of the parts that are on here that they even list part number 14, the label that goes on the lock body. I can't tell you that there is a particular part that I have sold any more than anything else. Generally, when you're doing parts, it's vandalism. Or someone got far too curious and opened up that lock case. Or it's just literally, like they said, 14 times grade 1 standards, 14 million cycles. So that document is handy not today when you're installing the lock or buying it. It's going to be handy years down the road when you need to refer to what parts are necessary. I've scrolled through the rest of the document. There's nothing else worth discussing in terms of what's there. Finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Sargent products that we sell, a link to the manufacturer's website, a link to the full product catalog as well as some archival catalogs, encyclopedic documents. Any important stuff about Sargent in general is dumped on that page. My name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. Thank you.